Thank you all. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch. This was great food, so a lot of credit to the Tobin Center for feeding us so well. Thank you very much. I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to lead this discussion with my friend, my fellow Detroiter, and a real guru when it comes to the idea of creating place, helping let a city's culture build a city brand. And so I'd like to welcome to the stage Haj Flemings, CEO, founder of Rebrand Cities. Haj, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. So one of the things that, that as we think about, we've talked a lot about the technology, the nuts and bolts, the data that goes into how we help create human-centered cities. But I think that the missing piece right now is that human center. And there's a great Shakespearean quote that, what is the city but the people? And I think that's a great way to kick this off and talk about how people and culture ultimately are going to define those vibrant, successful cities in the 21st century. As we think about that, Haj, tell us a little bit about Rebrand Cities and how communities can create a place for all people to succeed and thrive in the 21st century.
Okay, well, I'm excited to be here, first of all. And I think our session is, what, 3.5 hours for this session?
About 3.5, yep.
Oh, 30 minutes?
It's a tight 3.5,
okay,
though.
No, 30 minutes, right. I want to make sure that everybody was awake, right? So I'm excited. I believe that we should be creating cities for all people. And I wanted to start out with the quote that's from Jane Jacobs, which is an awesome quote, and I'm going to read it to make sure that I don't forget anything on the quote. But it talks about cities have the capacity of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everyone. And for me, I think it's important as we begin to think about the cities of the future, and we begin to think about places that we're bringing people to, that we need to make sure that we're creating places that everyone feels welcome, it's inclusive, because at the end of the day, I believe that our cities are better when everybody has a place at the table. And it's really important for us to think about this, because in 2050, we all know that like 68 to 70% of the people are going to live in cities. We also know that by 2040, I believe, we're going to have the majority of the population is going to be minority, right? So we have to make sure that we're creating places that are places that everybody feels comfortable, feels included, and we have stuff for everybody. So I think it's important for us to at least have that lens.
I think that's a really great point. And as we've heard a lot about some great stories here in San Antonio about creating places for everyone. This morning we had that just absolutely wonderful exploration of global cities as we looked at what's happening in India and China and around the world. But, you know, I'm really excited to be up here because both you and I live in Detroit. And I think that if there isn't a more inspiring story about what's happened over the last 5-10 years in Detroit and the potential that Detroit has going forward, I don't know what other story there is. So tell me a little bit about that Detroit. Tell the whole audience a little bit about that Detroit experience.
Yes. So I'm living in an actual case study, and that's the city of Detroit. So July 18, 2013, Detroit files the largest municipal bankruptcy. It's about $18 to $20 billion. And so you start looking at a city that built the middle class. That was a city that was thriving, that was built upon manufacturing and cars. And you look at, what do we do next? And so when you start looking at different ways to brand a city, you start looking at the city of Detroit to figure out what is next. What do we do in Detroit? Like, we make stuff in Detroit. And so now you have other companies that are looking at making bikes or making other kind of things and using that human potential. When you looked at Detroit, one thing that was interesting is that we had a workforce that was making a lot of money, and there wasn't a lot of education connected to their actual pay grade. And so now, how does that person transition into what's next when their next job opportunity probably is not going to pay them 6 figures a year, right? And so we had some real big challenges. So if you look at Chicago, the city was designed for tourism and things downtown. Detroit was designed as a manufacturing town. And when manufacturing goes away, then what do you have? And so now we're transitioning into more verticals or sectors in terms of things like that. But also too, trying to make sure that our downtown doesn't just become an outlet mall, right? Because now we have Under Armour downtown, we have Nike, which are all great, but are we creating a place for people? And so the one challenge that I have as I look back at my city is, okay, it's great, I see transformation, I see things happening, but I want to make sure that it's not just a shiny building, that the people from the suburbs can come downtown and they have a good time, but then the people who have been in the city don't have a place. We push them out because of housing and things like that. And so I think that there's always going to be that tension and trying to find a place where there's some balance from that particular standpoint. But I am optimistic. I see a lot of great things happening, but I also do see that there's challenges. And if we don't have everybody at the table, we're going to have a homogeneous city that is going to do what it's always done.
That's right. And what made Detroit special for such a long time was that there's always been those ups and downs, that cyclical flow, but the city's maintained a cultural identity of getting back up off the mat.
Yeah.
Whether it was Joe Louis, the symbol of our city from the 1920s and 30s up until today. But another interesting, real quick point about the challenges that Detroit faces is related to the sheer size of the city. We can fit Manhattan, Boston, San Francisco, all within our city limits, geographically speaking. And we had almost 2 million people in the 1950s, and now we have about 700,000 that live in the city. We have a massive suburban population covering 3 different counties.
And just to add to that, so if you go back to the 60s or go back to the 70s, you literally had a population that had upper, middle, and lower class all in the same city.
That's right.
And so what happened so now what happens is that you have the affluent community leaves, and you leave a lower class, less educated population, and so there's not this balance, right? In terms of being able to learn from, mentor. There was also this interesting study about pools. I don't know whether it was like, it was a study on public pools. And I don't know if it was in the 50s or 60s where, from a recreation standpoint, upper, middle, and lower class, we all had recreation together. And then came the private pools. And so what happened is that the affluent were not mixing and integrating with those who were in a lower social class. And so what happened is that you don't have the opportunity to be able to interact, to learn, and for your worldview to literally be changed. And so I think we see a lot of that inside of the city, and you're going to see that in a lot of other major cities. And so how do you balance that? Because if not, then you have the have and the have-nots. And it does create some really tough challenges in terms of making cities go forward.
And that's something that you've tackled head on with Rebrand Cities. Can you tell us a little bit about the work and the thought process that goes into your work to help make places more inclusive for all people?
Yes. So if you look at rebranding, we can look at it from like 3 different ways. We can look at it from the standpoint of campaigns. We can look at if we want to reposition, and we like to look at like co-creation. And so I wanted to show this slide because this is something that everybody know what this is? I know it's kind of hard to read. I know we're not all 18 years old anymore. But this was the original sketch by Milton Glaser for the I Love New York campaign, right? And so this campaign started in 1976. They had a budget originally of about $450,000 and moved up to about $4.5 million. The tourism went from $500 million in '76 to $1.6 billion in 1977. And so one way is to go use a campaign. But in terms of our conversation here, I feel like every city doesn't have that kind of budget. Every city is not at that particular level. And so we have mid-tier cities, we have mega cities, and then we have cities that are really trying to find other ways to be able to tell stories. And so as we began to approach our work from a branding standpoint, we figured it was going to be difficult for us to be able to go into cities and just do campaigns. And so we looked at Detroit and we said, okay, there's a lot of repositioning. And so the work that we're doing is more co-creation. And so with the co-creation model, it gave us an opportunity to be able to work with partners. And so in 2015, we were funded by the Knight Foundation. And we had this audacious idea, and it was called Rebrand Detroit. And so the idea was, let's take what's in Midtown and downtown Detroit and let's bring that into a neighborhood. So I get this bag of money. I'm excited about this idea. 7,000 people apply for this thing. I'm one of 32 winners. I had a better chance of hitting the lottery, right? And I win and I get this money, and I realize when I get to this neighborhood, I can't change it in a year. There's no way that I can get what I want to get done in a year. We had tremendous people who were coming in. We had started this accelerator, and we were doing some work, and we were bringing in people who worked with Apple, who had did digital for Beyonce, like incredible people. But the business owner didn't have time. And so what we realized is that a lot of these business owners didn't even have websites. And so it changed our thesis. And we started to look, and we're like, there's 28 million small businesses in the United States, of which 46% have no website. And so what we started to do is say, okay, all right, what if we could help to change the narrative and tell the story of a city, not by buildings, but by its people? So if you wanted to come to Livernois Avenue of Fashion in Detroit, I would direct you to Narrowway Cafe that's ran by John and David Merritt, and it's a stress-free environment, and it's a beautiful cafe, and it's in one of the most affluent zip codes in the city of Detroit. That's how I would direct people. So our vision and our dream is, how can we now take that and look for ways to be able to change the narrative and use regular, everyday people to be able to tell the stories of cities, right? And so we've worked with hundreds of businesses. We've done it in probably in about 8 different cities, Miami, Chicago, Mesa, Arizona, Detroit. We're going to be doing stuff in Haiti, Brighton, which is right outside of London. So there's a lot of cities that are actually, we're going to be a part of this. But it's amazing just to see how we can take these stories of people who are invisible in the digital economy and tell their stories so that it can help generate revenue. And so our next step with that is, how do we take those stories and then take these businesses, get them online, and work with municipal partners to be able to say, if we work with 100 businesses, it'll have this type of economic impact. And that's our goal, is to be able to tell the stories, but to also show the economic impact in those cities.
So, I mean, that's a really laudatory goal, and what you're talking about here is looking at the individual, but also putting that within that context of the city itself. Talk to me a little bit more about maybe what a city like San Antonio or Austin or Dallas could do to make sure that the city government is responsive to those people and those businesses to collaboratively create the brand and the cultural identity of a place.
So I've seen this so many times. Most people have great intentions. And so what happened, even in Detroit, we had someone who wanted to create a robot statue. And they're like, this needs to go into a neighborhood. Like, the people from that neighborhood, they could have cared less about a robot statue. And so what happens is that people come in on a white horse and they have good intentions, and maybe they spend no time in those neighborhoods. And I know even the community that we were going in, I didn't live in that community. I looked like the people I was serving, but I didn't live in that community. And what I had to realize is that I had to take a step back. And I had to be able to learn to find out what was important to them and make them a part of the conversation versus just, okay, you're now going to have to live with this thing that we have created, and I'm going to go back to my great house that's in the middle of, And so I think making them a part of the conversation, making them feel inclusive, and it's not like you are like saving them, right? And so what I hate is that, that something comes in and like, you ought to be grateful that I decided to come into your community and to go do this. Because I think when we work together, what happens is that it makes everything better. It makes things safer. So imagine if you have people who are re-entering society, and if they don't have a job, where are they going to go? They're going to go back to what they know. They're going to go back to certain communities. And it's not an issue as long as it's not somebody else's community, right? And so I think that as we start to think about holistic solutions, it creates places that are just a lot more inviting, places that we want to be in. So I think making sure that everybody is at the table, or including them in a way to where they have a vested interest. We were doing a project with Forward Cities. And so we went to Cleveland, and we went to a community where they were doing, they had a grape orchard. And so they were making wine. And so I was talking to the guy who was in charge of the orchard, and I was like, well, how do you make sure that nobody takes the grapes? And he's like, so we hire from the community, and they make sure that that is protected. But they had a crop that was a high yield and those kind of things, but they took pride in it, and they made sure that that neighborhood was taken care of. Plus, they were getting paid living wages, right? And so I think we have to kind of think outside the box a little bit.
Well, picking up exactly on what you were saying, this goes back to what Paula was saying yesterday about what CPS is doing, Mayor Young this morning, Brian Dillard. It's about listening to the community. That's first and foremost. As you said, we can't act like we are the savior. We have this brilliant idea. No, it's collaborative. It's listening first, and that's, I think, what CPS Energy is really trying to focus on here in San Antonio.
And I think, like, to your point, and so we're doing some work with Travel Portland, which is the tourism component of Portland. And the interesting part, so like they have a really cool airport. Has anyone ever been to the Portland airport? Like, it's a great airport, and they have some stores in there that have like local products. And so like I found myself like spending like 15 minutes, 20 minutes like finding this stuff. It wasn't like this manufactured stuff where they just slapped a logo on there. And so it was interesting that they really made an effort. And so when I heard the conversation from Brian yesterday about the kiosks, it took me back to a conversation that I had in Portland. And one thing that they're doing is that they're working on kiosks to put them in the airport. So in most of the stores, there aren't any vendors of color in there, but now they're working on creating an actual kiosk where people could order stuff and they could have it shipped directly to their house, and it creates another revenue stream for those entrepreneurs without having to build infrastructure and things like that. And so we have to look at how can we look at something like Amazon and not say Amazon is the devil, and just look and say, you know what? All right, so now if marketing has changed people's behavior and people are now buying stuff online, can we create experiences to where they can buy local stuff and create an experience inside of an airport or inside of different places where people can connect to that local community?
That's a great point. I want to take a sidestep here and talk about creativity, because creativity really is at the heart of brand identity. What does the creative class, and why is the creative class so crucial to creating that identity and that cultural experience for a city?
Well, I'm 48 years old now, folks, so I'm not 18 anymore. And what I realize is that no matter how much I think I know, I need to have young people around me. And I'm not saying it in an R. Kelly kind of way. I'm just saying that I need to have people, no pun intended about R. Kelly, right? But I think it's important to have people who have young ideas. And I think that when you bring that particular community and those millennials, they see the world totally differently than we did. Me and my parents, we were like, okay, let's get a job because we're trying to make sure that we can make ends meet. They're like, I'm not going to take a job if I don't feel right about the job. What's the purpose, and the meaning behind it and all the other things. And I think bringing that fresh perspective in is critical because it's a lifeblood of the city. And so I know cities typically like get into this thing of, like they'll see like Silicon Valley and like, I want to replicate that. Well, I don't know if you really want to replicate Silicon Valley. Like the lifestyle and just getting housing out there is incredibly tough. But I can look at that and say, okay, what are they doing so that they can attract young talent that has incredible ideas where nothing is impossible? And so I know in Detroit, we always have this question of, is it the place first, or do we create the jobs? And what do we have to do to be able to attract the talent? And in Detroit, we've allowed corporations to kind of hinder certain things. So we just got light rail, I think about 2 years ago, because we have the big three, and we drive everywhere. If you have to go a quarter of a mile, you drive. Like there's no such thing as like, I'm going to walk around the corner. Like you drive everywhere. And so those are things that like, I get like the next generation are like, look, like I don't want to drive everywhere. I want to have light rail or things like that. So I think we have to create an environment that attracts that talent because they're going to help us to be able to reimagine our cities.
Well, that's so important, and it's also being authentic to what your identity is, your version of creativity. And so that Detroit version of creativity is design and manufacturing. And we've taken that ethos of design and brought that to life in our art, in our public spaces.
I think you hit on a very good point. And one structure that I always like to talk about, is anybody here from Miami? So there's a parking structure. It's the 1111 Lincoln Road parking structure. It was designed by Hirag and Mira, $65 million structure. And so this structure, you park cars, but they do other stuff in there. They have weddings, they do yoga, like literally where cars are parked at. And so even as we begin to rethink about structures and buildings and things that we create, we need to think about it not just from a standard utility standpoint. When you think about brands, people don't just buy Coca-Cola because they're trying to get healthy or things like that. It goes back to happiness, right? And so people make decisions based upon things that make them feel good. They want to be associated with it. And so I think we have to create experiences and reinvent why people are going to go and frequent this space, or what's going to draw people to it. As I travel, going to Paris and going to London, it was interesting how like everybody's going to take pictures of the Louvre and take pictures of the Eiffel Tower. And so I think there are things that draw people to the city that are interesting that they want to share. And we have to create experiences that are going to bring people in, that have people like saying, look, when you go to Detroit, you have to do this. If you like Thai food, you have to go to a place called Takoi. It is in Corktown. It is in an old manufacturing car garage, but it's amazing on the inside. And I always direct people there because I want them to have a unique experience. I don't want you going to Applebee's. Nothing wrong with Applebee's. If that's your spot, I don't want to hate on Applebee's, but I want you to have a Detroit experience, right?
Right.
And so I think those are some of the things that we need to.
That's a great Detroit experience. Just a quick aside. I mean, think about what that is, and this is something I see in San Antonio as well. You've got a Thai restaurant in a neighborhood named after the Irish city that Irish immigrants first moved to the city in. And that's what makes these cities so vibrant and unique. And we need to celebrate that and accentuate that in that cultural expression. Pivoting ever so slightly, this is a conversation about how we move into the future. Mm-hmm. And we are going to need technology to move into that future. How does technology play a role in accentuating the brand, accentuating the community, accentuating the culture?
I think technology is critical. So back when I was younger, we had yellow. Did anybody remember I get like the yellow pages? Okay, all right. So now when I get a yellow page, I just throw that in the garbage. I don't really need that anymore. I find everything on my phone. And so this is a gateway to the entire world. And so if there's not a way to be able to connect to whether it's a restaurant, getting a recommendation, there's a validation that takes place. And so I think cities that are smart understand that people are going to get connected to different experiences through their actual mobile device. And so making sure that things are tech-enabled in the city are critical, and thinking about how people are going to interface and how people find out about stuff. So if I go to a city and I want to find out about restaurants, like I probably typically go to, you know what, why don't we just ask a question? So what app would you go to if you were trying to find a restaurant? Yelp, okay.
Any others? Any other apps?
Yelp, okay, OpenTable, Yelp.
Google.
This is not a rhetorical question. You can kind of just blot out. Okay, like Google Maps, right? So the different ways that we find out about this stuff, right? And what if these businesses are not there? And what if cities haven't found ways to be able to integrate this stuff in so that it makes it easier for someone to have an experience, to stay, to spend time in that city, or to travel? When I was coming here, I was on the plane, and it was two individuals who sat behind me, and they're from Detroit, and they decided to come to San Antonio for their late Valentine's Day vacation. Mm-hmm. They literally were coming to San Antonio. And that's a good thing, right? Right, okay. So, but they decided out of all the cities to go to that they wanted to come to San Antonio. So there was something that they saw online that piqued their interest in terms of being able to come here, right? And so I think those are the things that are going to be critically important. One thing that I want to talk about too, even in our work, I think it's going to be very important that we engage women. Lots of times what happens is that we sit at tables where they're men, the men might be Caucasian, or they might have historically been in certain situations, and I'm not trying to throw any dispersions to you. But I think it's important for us to understand that men don't have all the good ideas, right? And so even in the work that we do—
Most of the time we don't have, you know.
Right, so even in the work that we do, like 62% of the business owners that we work with are women business owners. And so it's important to make sure that we have different voices at the table,
right,
especially when they make 90% of the purchasing decisions. So for anybody who's married, any guy who's married, you already know your wife is making 90% of the decision. Even if you don't raise your hand, we all know it's true, right? And so it's important for us to be able to understand that, like, everybody has to be a part of what's moving forward in our cities.
That's a great point. As we think about expanding voices, I'd love you to take us out on sort of that forward-looking perspective of whether it's increasing the role of gender voices, minority voices as we build a culture, whether it's in San Antonio or Austin or Timbuktu. How can we create our own culture and our own identity and our own brand?
So one thing that I think is critically important, so anyone who does like design thinking knows that we always talk about getting out of the office, getting out of the cubicle. So it's one thing you can design and just keep going over the idea, but at some point you have to get the idea in front of real customers, right? And so I think taking the ideas that we have and getting them in front of people so that they can experience, so that we can get feedback, is critically important. The other thing is that we have to understand that there are other people that have good ideas. The other aspect of branding, which is critically important, is storytelling. People make an emotional connection to a story. And so it's critically important to be able to understand the ethos of our city, of the places, and be able to create those stories that are going to attract talent, that are going to attract corporations and bring experiences in. I think those parts are going to be important. And then I think we also have to understand that this is something that's going to evolve over time. So no matter what you create today, it's going to change. And I think we have to make sure that we have a complete mindset in terms of making sure that young people, women, people of color, even boomers, right? I mean, so what I try to do, and I'm not trying, I'm trying to make sure that I don't say it's the wrong way, right? So I think it's important. So you might have a young person that has great ideas, but they don't have the network or the connection. And then we have the boomers who have been at this for a while, and they have the connection, but maybe they don't have the time or the energy. How do we fuse together these talents and these resources and make sure that things are working? The other aspect is, how can we also help corporations to become better citizens? So for us, we have a partnership with WordPress, and so they power 32% of the internet, and the goal is that they help us to be able to create like great solutions for cities and things like that. So we have to also make corporations be accountable and make sure that they are good corporate citizens and making sure that they're doing things that are in the best interest of the entire community as well.
I love it, Haj. Thank you. Accountability. Yeah, let's give it up for Haj. Accountability, listening, and working together, collaboration. I think that's a beautiful message to take us out into the next discussion. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, and I have one last request, and I know this is kind of odd, but we're going to do a group selfie, folks. I know this is kind of breaking the mold right now, and I'm going to get you out of your comfort zone, but we're going to step down here real quick, and we're going to do a quick little selfie together. So this is going to blow up. There's going to be millions of people that are going to tag this, and you're going to be known all over the world. So if you want to kind of, if they come in a little bit, we can do that too. I didn't hurt myself, so that was good. Okay, all right. So we're going to do this quick little selfie, and we're going to see if we're going to be standing up here by ourselves or we're going to have people in the picture with us. All right, we're going to have a few people. I look like I have a halo over my head, so all right. We'll do one more. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Give it up for Haj. Thank you.